several segments of the business. So on this part of the wall are the faces more known to us. Don Juan, that illegitimate son of Charles V and Barbara Blomberg. Ulrich Schmidl, a co-discoverer of Brazil and a co-builder of Buenos Aires. Born and raised in Regensburg, he was one of those noble knights who was quite adventurous, who took part in many campaigns, and one of those campaigns brought him to Latin America. Johannes Kepler, an astronomer, mathematician, and an astrologist, and a royal astrologist of the Habsburgs. Well, Barbara Blomberg, Margaret Rutinger, that wife of a merchant who was one of the emancipated women of Regensburg, living here in the second half of the 1300s, who was capable of managing her husband's trade in his absence. Hi, Satyam. And still in the city archives are the accounting books which she kept using several languages, including Arabic numbers. 2 German queens, and we are yet to talk about them. And this Gisela is quite interesting. In Bamberg Cathedral, we saw a sculpture of a man on a horse. And that sculpture is regarded as the oldest sculpture of that kind created in Germany since the Roman times. And that man on a horse was actually her husband, who also was the king of Hungary, who got baptized, Christianized, under her influence and basically under the influence of this region. And where else can you see the image of a Roman emperor, and in our case it's Marcus Aurelius, next to a Jewish learned man and a rabbi? Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor during the time when the military Roman fort here was at its peak in the 2nd century. And Yehuda ben Samuel Hasid, I have no clue how to correctly pronounce the last part of his name, was a rabbi and a learned man who was the rabbi of the synagogue of Regensburg, who led the local yeshiva, and the synagogue of Regensburg was the 5th oldest synagogue within the borders of modern-day Germany, built in the first decades of the 1200s. So, and now let's start our walk from this wall. So here you can see the Sign Kunst project, art project of Oleg Kuzenko. And these are people who are connected or who represent the city's history. Excellent project, terrific wall. I'm very happy that they've made it. And the wall is located on the southern border of the city. In fact, during the time of the Roman fort, the wall of the Roman fort ran along the street. We know that the Romans pretty much left in the 6th century, and this territory was conquered by the Germanic tribe. And the main Germanic tribe was called the Bavaria. So they established their kingdom here and made Regensburg the first capital of the Bavarian kingdom. The Romans left them the early Christian churches, and those Germanic tribes who were here, the Bavaria, they were smart and they didn't resist the Christianization process, unlike Saxons in northern Germany. So Christianization continued, And the process was led by the local ruling family, by the local dukes. In the middle of the 600s, they invited here, this ducal family invited here, a monk from France who was known for being very pious. They invited him to spread the word of God and to be the family priest. So the monk arrived, and he was good at spreading the word of God and being the family priest. And one day, the daughter of the duke confessed to him that she was pregnant from a knight of her father's court, and they were not married. And she was very scared to share the news with her father. And the monk told her basically to tell her father that he fathered the child. He thought that he had enough status and influence to protect both himself and her. And while I'm telling you this story, let's have a sneak peek at the palace, the only palace in Regensburg, which belongs to the Thurn und Taxis family. And it's connected to the story of St Emmeram. And that's the privately owned park. But there are no signs saying here that I cannot stick my camera through the bars of the gate. So let's continue. So having said that, the monk left on pilgrimage to Rome. The girl shared the news with the father got furious and ordered his son to catch the monk and to kill him. And that's what the son did. But then the girl told the truth. And the father felt huge remorse. And he'd ordered to bring the dead body of the monk to Regensburg and to have him buried in one of the early Christian churches which they inherited from the Romans. And according to the legend, that church was here. It didn't last till our days. Now you're looking at the palace of the Thurn und Taxis family. So the monk was buried there, and because he took the sin upon himself, which he hadn't done, he was made a saint. Also at that time, at the period of early Christianization, they really needed to create saints and martyrs to strengthen the beliefs of people and to actually create something for people to believe in. So the early Christian church, which they inherited from the Romans, presumably was somewhere here. And the monk who later became St Emmeram was buried here. And he became the first saint of that city. And the church where he was buried became a place of pilgrimage. And actually later, the Regensburg beer festival, the Dult, the time of the Dult was tailored to the St Emmeram pilgrimage dates. So the monk was buried in the middle of the 600s. Some 50 years later, the same ducal family invited here the monks of the Benedict order, and we continue looking at the Thurn und Taxis palace through the bar gate. So this family invited here the monks of the Saint Benedict order to establish the abbey and to take care of the St Emmeram church. And the monks were known for being very pious, very hardworking, and very smart. And in the year 700, the St Emmeram Abbey was founded by those monks. And gradually, it became one of the most powerful abbeys in Central Europe and one of the biggest landlords in Central Europe. And 50 years later, Regensburg became the seat of the bishop and the center of the bishopric. And all these things combined turned Regensburg into one of the major centers of Christianity in this part of Europe. So if you think of it and compare this region, for example, with northern Germany or with eastern Franconia, Bamberg, those regions were still pagan, while Regensburg by that time had become one of the major centers of Christianity. So because the St Emmeram Church became the place of pilgrimage, very quickly it became quite small. And those monks of the Benedict order destroyed that Roman church and built a bigger one here in the 8th century. And for many years, historians, well, many years in the 20th century, historians thought that the church, which you're going to see in a second, is actually a remodeled church built in the 8th century. And then it turned out that it's not true. That second church didn't last till our days. It was replaced by the third one, built in the 10 and 1200s, and that's what we're going to see today. Although it was also remodeled over time, many times, but there are fragments of the original walls of the church which was built between 10 and 1200s, and we are entering what's today known as the parish church. Up until the late 1700s, it was the St Emmeram Abbey. So because the abbey was among the first ones, and because it became so important for the rulers, over the course of the Middle Ages, it got a lot of lavish gifts and a lot of money and a lot of land from the rulers. And it managed to create a lot of important art. And today some of this art is the oldest medieval art preserved in Bavaria. This front yard in the 17th and 18th centuries became the place of burial of the local elite. And on the wall you can see the tombstones. And you are now looking towards the medieval portal, which belongs to this period between 10 and 1200s. And it's decorated with 3 sculptures: St Emmeram, Christ, and Saint Dionysius. It's not that Dionysius, who was the Roman god connected with wine drinking and wine making. No, it's a local saint. And these 3 sculptures are known for being the oldest religious art of Bavaria, or sculptures of Bavaria, created in 1050. St Emmeram, Christ, and Saint Dionysius. And now we are going through this portal into the church, which was redecorated in Baroque style in the 1700s. And that was the trend all over Europe for the old churches. But its main murals on the ceiling talk about its medieval history.